way that Microsoft traditionally thought about stuff was like, hey, it's going to be yearly releases. And we're like, no, we ship every week.
What is going on, everybody? I'm your host, Sean Sharabi, and today we have a very, very special guest. For those of you that have used Microsoft Outlook, I think I know a guy who you can thank. Kevin Henrikson, everybody. Kevin, welcome, man.
Thanks for having me, Sean.
In this show, we're not going to be spending much time on going into the background of our impressive guest. But I will take a few minutes, and a few minutes, I do actually mean that because of the history that this guy has, to share a summary for everyone, especially this journey by Kevin, which is nothing short of incredible. So Kevin was born in the Bay Area of Northern California, specifically Oakland, California. He grew up on a pig farm in Central California in a city called Galt. And Kevin went to LA for college at UCLA and decided to check the mechanical engineering box, as I saw, despite not fully knowing what it was beyond being good at math and building stuff, as one of the high school teachers mentioned to you. So Kevin, after that, moved back to the Bay Area and has primarily been in San Francisco, as I understand, based for the last 25 years. So this is where things get even more exciting. You first started a company, Zimbra, in 2005, which eventually was acquired by Yahoo for $350 million, I read, and then actually reacquired by VMware. And you stayed on through 2013, kind of before your next venture. So Kevin actually was about 8 years through those couple acquisitions. 2013, he founded his first startup, Acompli. I think I'm pronouncing it correctly.
Acompli, yeah, close enough.
There we go. With two other friends. And they quickly raised $7 million building an email app for the phone for people who had a Gmail account and a work account with Exchange. It's funny talking about this now, seeing where apps are these days. They saw a great app being built for Gmail, but people had to go to work and work on Microsoft Exchange. So at this time, obviously, Microsoft Exchange was the dominant force. And it seemed like the thesis was, let's build a cool app that combined our personal and email accounts in a more smooth way. Great idea. 18 months later, which 18 months, that's correct, Microsoft acquired them for $200 million. And I think one of the most impressive elements was that it was a team of 10 engineers, one designer, one marketer, and 2 business development individuals. Turns out, Kevin thought they were joining the team at Microsoft and going to work on some cool Microsoft stuff. But Microsoft actually wanted to rename the app to Outlook and ship it as Microsoft Outlook for the iPhone and Android. So again, thank you, Kevin, for Microsoft Outlook. Building something like that with a 14-person team was nothing short of an amazing feat, and we'll definitely get into that in a little bit. Day one of the acquisition, the app had 3 million users, and about 3 years later, once you had left Microsoft, they had several hundred million monthly active users. Very impressive. Kevin continued on to lead engineering at Instacart for 4 years, and today Kevin is building, as his LinkedIn says, stealth, but he has informed me that the intention is AI focused on enterprise regulated industries such as finance, healthcare, things of that nature. Okay, Kevin, I think I stole your thunder. That is a hell of a background. Did I mention or did I miss anything that you want to mention?
No, that was a pretty comprehensive. You definitely did your research to pull it together. So yeah, all those bits are out there on the internet, but probably not in a single set of bullets. So that was pretty awesome.
Yes. Very, very, very cool to hear about it. So, okay, let's get into this. I actually want to kind of go a little bit more to the beginning. I guess for me, when I'm thinking of what you guys built and the timing and so on and so forth, I'm thinking of the dynamics of technology today and some of the most impressive companies in the world. Microsoft is obviously one of them. What impressed you about how Microsoft operated back when you were there? Which, maybe what are the things that you think of that's contributed them to being the $3 trillion plus company that they are today?
Yeah, I think when we got acquired, you have to kind of think about where the state was. That Satya just kind of came into the role. And so if you think of Satya coming from Azure, coming from their sort of cloud hosting, which, at the time was not the leader in cloud hosting, right? And, even today, depending on which way you look at it, still lags behind, AWS for like the most like sort of customers and things like that. Mm-hmm. But they were looking for ways to sort of just do better and really sort of reset themselves. And so Satya's big pitch was like growth mindset. How do we learn? How do we move quicker? And Microsoft had hundreds of people working on a mobile app. And now it sounds like a little bit crazy. It's like, hey, we built it with 10, they had 100. And their goal was different. Like our goal was like, how do we just go and, build it from a ground up, focused on the iPhone, and then sort of essentially, kind of copied that design to Android. where Microsoft said, hey, how do we build like the best layer of framework? And they were like, they built their own database, their own file system, like all these pieces, and it cross-compiled to iOS, Android, Mac, and Windows. And so it was like the Windows 10 base. And again, lots of those pieces have now made it into the modern Outlook app on the phone and things like that, but it took a lot longer, right? So the way that Microsoft traditionally thought about stuff was like, hey, version 1, version 2, maybe not the greatest, but by the time they get to version 3 and beyond, it's like insane. And they've spent a ton of amount of time on polish on it. And so what we came in was like, no. We're not going to ship, old school Microsoft, like every 3 years, you get a new release of Windows and Office. Then they said, oh, now it's going to be yearly releases. And they had kind of got to this monthly sort of cadence in some of their cloud delivered stuff. And we're like, no, we ship every week, like mobile and the way that modern apps ship. And so that was a big shift. And it was interesting because the first few weeks they're like, well, that's impossible because our like build signing process takes like 8 days. You have to make a request. It goes 3 days to this team. And we're like, no. It needs to meet our process. Like our engineer, our lead iOS engineer would click the button and in 10 seconds, the build would be signed. And like, we're like, we need to automate this. And so that took some negotiation, but then we got it to that point where today, and you look at it, hundreds and hundreds of releases later, Outlook still ships every week, and so does the other iOS apps and the other mobile apps, and even some of the other Office apps ship very frequently because of that change, which gave them that iterative thing. And so if you think of that as a single sort of point in time transition, a lot of the way Microsoft had kind of internally transitioned their teams was looking for acquisitions to bring in change, not just the cadence of the way they did things, but also sort of like find that as a way to sort of teach these, there's hundreds of thousands of engineers, right, working at Microsoft, teaching them how to do things differently and, have that growth mindset and not be stuck in your ways. Like we used to have this joke, people would introduce themselves when they get to Microsoft, hey, I've been here 28 years or 26 years. And you're just like, they would literally start with that as the introduction. And you're like, I can't even fathom like working at a company for that long, but let alone that being like my calling card. But it sort of showed that some of the culture there was very much on a tenure based sort of like, hey, we've been here for a long time. And I think that was a big shift. But it also now sees why Microsoft, as they partner with OpenAI and some of the new things they're doing, has really moved really quickly and grown very fast, because when they do find those changes, they're able to implement them, and they are dynamic. They are a force of nature, and they have 1 in 7 people in the world use Office, right? And so you're like, wow, that's a huge user base to be sort of activating on. And so when they add a new button or they roll out a new feature, the audience there is very large.
So do you think that, because when I think of technology, the core of it is the speed in which it develops and so on. And there's not many companies that have stayed at the forefront for such a long time. And at first what my approach was, okay, why, how are a team of 14 able to spin up such a valuable product to a company like Microsoft when they had, a blank check for the amount of money they could pour into something like this? But it sounds like kind of what you're harping on is there was this, you guys were very myopically focused on what you were developing. And for Microsoft, maybe there was more like just layers, obviously, that they had to go through. But do you feel like they were looking just much further down the road, and you guys were more focused on like today, here, now, and so that speed of execution you guys were able to move quickly on?
Yeah, they were looking farther down the road, but they were also saddled with this like debt, right? Because for them, they were like, oh, we couldn't just throw away 80% of the features, where we could launch our version of email with essentially no calendar to start, and then no like recurring meetings, and we never built tasks and journal. And there was a lot of like buttons that kind of lived in the Outlook app that everybody sort of, at the time had grown to, sort of love and hate. The other piece is that Microsoft as a company, if you think about it, Outlook was not designed for the end user. It was designed for the IT person at the company. So the person that bought Microsoft at the enterprise was the IT person, and they would roll out Office to all the employees, where we had sort of, kind of flipped the script and said, no, it's this consumerization, right? People are now bringing their own apps to work. They're bringing in Dropbox. They're bringing in, Asana, apps that they just love that themselves, and then they bring them to work, right? And so we said, hey, how can we do that and have an app that consumers love, but also is trusted by IT? And that was kind of our tagline, was like, trusted by IT, but loved by, the users. But we would say it would say it reverse. We're like loved by users, trusted by IT. So the users was first. Because if your users love the app, then IT's job's actually easy, right? If
Yeah.
their job we always thought was the simplest, it's like a checklist of things. Do these security things, do these audits, painful, but if you do that, IT is going to be satisfied. And so I think Microsoft had traditionally grown up and the team had been, calloused in some level of all these IT requests and all these things. They'd kind of lost the piece of like, wait, if we just built what the users loved, you would actually, build a very different app. And that's kind of what we had started with from that point of view.
Yeah, and I know you harp a lot on the speed of prototype development, and specifically have this philosophy of speed of execution as a feature. Take me through, you guys sold to Microsoft, then you joined this larger corporation. What does that mean to you? I guess more more practically on a ground level perspective at a large company like Microsoft, or even eventually we'll talk about Instacart. How does that look behind the scenes? That sort of philosophy.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing is like just complete the work by Friday and ship something every week. And I think you get on a lot of teams and a lot of large development teams, and even ones at traditional orgs I've worked with now, where they're like, oh, we do 2-week sprints or monthly sprints. And you're like, but when you look at it, a lot of the work actually gets done the last day. So whatever date you set, whether it's 2 weeks, a month, whatever, you're like, if it's 2-week sprints, like most of the work comes in on the Thursday or Friday before that sprint ends. And you're like, well, why don't we just set it to every week so we see those little mini sprints, every Thursday or every Friday? And then what you find is that very senior developers that are very comfortable pushing large changes can check something in on the last day and be comfortable. Where a junior engineer says, oh, you know what, I'm going to land my change on Monday or Tuesday and let that sit all week and kind of get tested on the dev branch before that goes to the Friday cut. And what we find is that you have a lot less unshipped code. So people aren't writing code for weeks that's not making it to users, right? And in a market like this, especially now with AI, where people are expecting very rapid change, you can actually, if you're shipping every week, or sometimes people are shipping multiple times a week or continuous development, you're getting that code, those changes, whether it's features, bug fixes, whatever, out to users. And that becomes way easier, right? Because if you're wrong, you get feedback, you fix it. Where at Microsoft, they would have this model where they'd work for several weeks, they would cut a branch and then test for like several more weeks. So that by the time the code got to the user, it could have been 2 months, even though it looks like they were on weekly schedules or monthly schedules. And then they end up spending all this time debating on things that are essentially 2 months old. And you're like, man, that's a really bummer of a way to spend your time. And so that sort of agility and that change, as we came in and sort of sped things up, really helped them sort of free themselves to be like, wow, let's just think we can think long-term vision. But even with the longest vision, you're like, you got to take the first step, you got to take the first bite. And so I always say, like, well, if you're going to, hey, this thing's going to take 3 months, well, you're not going to just wait 3 months and do the last thing on the 3 months. What are you going to do on week 1? Let's do that, commit that, and make that move forward, even if that's not visible to users, if it's an internal change. And a lot of that was, quite frankly, this. I would go around and kind of evangelize some of our processes to other teams and talk to their leaders and remote teams and distributed teams, because we had, teams on, 7 different countries, right? We were all spread out, right? And so it took time for that message to sort of reach, even though, we always used to say, like, Satya can say that in the all hands, but for that to percolate through, 100,000 full-time employees and another 100,000 contractors takes a long time.
Yeah.
And that shift was long for them. But the practicality was, hey, you ship every Friday. The reality was that took years for that sort of like mantra to change. And it changed in waves, right? Like the Outlook team changed because that's how we showed up. Eventually the Word, the Excel team, the other teams sort of came onto that. And then now you see it where you look at, the apps that Microsoft has, and almost all of them ship very frequently if they're in a, kind of mobile format.
And is that, do you think that philosophy rings true at most of these technology companies, or is that an edge, would you call it, for, Microsoft or somebody else that adopts that?
I think a lot of mobile first companies have that philosophy. And I think there was different debates at the time, right? I mean, this is like literally we celebrated the 10-year anniversary of Outlook being, sort of Outlook iOS being released on January 29th. And so it's been 10 years now, which is crazy, 2015 or 2015 to 2025. And so 10 years later, I think, there's a lot of, you're going like from prompt right to shipped code with AI and some of these new sort of tools where you can prototype very quickly. And so I think today it's much more common. for the teams that are winning. I do think there's still software companies out there, and definitely like large public companies out there that are shipping software in sort of legacy ways. But I think that is a ripe opportunity for disruption as we sort of, see AI take over, where it's like the old days of like shipping very complex software. The reason you took time is you were very afraid to break something. And with AI, you can build in both the checks, the balances of like, hey, go make this change. But before you do that, write, 100 unit tests or 100 validation tests, because a lot of, legacy software doesn't have good testing, not good automated testing. And now with AI, you can generate AI, testing and a test harness, right, to validate that. So my sense is we'll see more companies shift to that. And if they don't, I think they're going to sort of get out competed by companies that are adopting those practices.
That are adopting it. And did you see how different once you went to Instacart was the team and execution, the whole ecosystem there versus Microsoft? Was it a pretty large difference?
Yeah. So when I got to Instacart, they had about 50 engineers. And then during the pandemic, we scaled from 50 to, over 1,000, closer to 1,500 over those couple of years. And I think that the difference with Instacart was that they were already a much modern platform. They were shipping, sort of continuous development. You would check in, pushes would happen pretty regularly, almost, in some cases and in some teams, because it was dependent on teams, right? And this was also something I saw when I was at Twitter after Elon had acquired. Like they had like 300 microservices, and each of these teams each team was kind of protecting themselves with their own microservice. So the architecture was built in this sort of like what I would call agile way, but you end up creating like almost competing teams, right? So you have like, oh, I've got the consumer team or the consumer infrastructure team, or I have the, the backend team, and each of them are shipping on their own cadences very quickly, but they're sort of protecting themselves from other teams by having APIs or separation. And so you see that speed, but I think you build up a different sort of callus where the teams aren't really working well together because they're separated. And I think that we're also seeing change with some of these new, again, kind of AI tools where now you can ingest the entire code base across all teams and make a change and say, oh, if you make this team that's this change, it's going to break these other things, and sort of predict that up front. So the teams were moving faster, but I don't think they were more efficient. So I think the number of engineers that it was required to sort of make big changes wasn't as efficient as it could be today. And if you were all of the companies and teams I work with today are less than 10 people, right? And so these are like very small teams.
Yeah.
And they're able to ship a lot of code very frequently. And also like, after 6-8 months, you're like, hey, we want to change direction. You can sort of throw everything away and reprompt yourself back into existence because you kind of know where you started and you had like a baseline framework. And so I think the way teams are going to change and the way companies are going to build today is going to make even a bigger shift. And companies like Microsoft, like Instacart, that now are using AI to sort of adopt like rapid changes, and they have like very high-end engineers. Where if you go down the Fortune 500 and sort of go out of tech and go into like more sort of non-software or non-technology industries, the software engineering talent at those companies typically is not as high as like a kind of tech company or Silicon Valley company. So they're going to actually see the biggest benefit, right? Because now you've got, they're sort of putting on their Iron Man suit with AI, and they're able to now become an elite developer by using those tools to get themselves there. And so I think we're going to start to see a pretty big gap closing for teams that adopt this technology. And then ones that don't, I think they're going to really start to fall behind at a rate that's unprecedented.
Yeah, the barrier of entry kind of has gone down, to so to speak. And honestly, I mean, this is part of what I really wanted to get into more. One of the things I was thinking is like how, okay, so there's how you built it previously, then there's everything we know today. If you were back at a company, whether it's Microsoft or Instacart, but if you were back at a company like that, how would you have designed the engineering department differently than how you did, 5-10 years ago?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the biggest thing is you would focus more on the how. So I think like in traditional teams, like you have these developer tools or developer advocacy teams, or you get to teams where you have 1,000 or hundreds of engineers. You end up with like a team of like 10 people or 15 people that are like the developer advocacy team or the developer tooling team, where they're like a small team that's building tools for deployment or helping the other engineers, right? They're essentially a team that's designed just to build things to make engineering better at the company. And my sense is that skill set, if done right with AI, will become like the largest part of the organization, right? Because the actual app building, I mean, now you can have like sort of entrepreneurial product managers or technologists sort of coming up with the ideas and then just sending them off to like, prompting to sort of go write the code and write most of the spec. And then the actual team that's implementing the code and designing safety and testing and rollback and features like that, that team's going to need to be the biggest because they're going to be able to accept essentially the most amount of like very new, essentially untested code or like AI code that's come out where humans haven't reviewed it if you're really working at speed. And so I think that is where we'll see, modern teams built with, heavily, AI generated code, where a lot of the code that will ship today on some of our teams, we never look at. Like you literally prompt it, run it, deploy it, and as long as the test pass, you ship it. And if it doesn't work, you kind of, ship it again with an AI fix.
And do you think that it's as, I mean, I can imagine there's, some of these companies, teams are massive, right? Like, do you see that it's pretty simple flip to like, okay, we just need to downsize these teams by a hell of a lot and refocus the priorities, more of the focus on the how and so on? Like, should it be I guess two questions. One, should it be a quick, simple pivot? And do you see companies making that quick pivot?
Yeah. I mean, you definitely can make quick changes. I think the questions and the details of like, do we see companies do it? And I think the answer is not yet. Some of them are for sure. A lot of people are talking about it and trying it, but I think the devil's in the details. When you look at companies again in regulated businesses, they're very, very scared and nervous of AI. And because of that, there's like gatekeepers, whether it's a policy team, a security team, or just the executive team not being comfortable. And I think that,
and sorry to cut you off. What do you think they're not like? What's the central risk that you think they haven't been able to get comfortable with yet?
Yeah. To fear the unknown, right? Like they don't have an individual to go back to and blame. They don't have, it breaks their system. That breaks the way of thinking. Like in the old days, if something went wrong or this check and balance, and many times like they'll blame it on things they're not sure. They'll be like, oh, well, the compliance won't allow us to do that, or the auditor won't let us do that. And then you go and ask the auditor, oh, tell me more about like what we can't do. And they're like, well, I'm not really sure how this thing works. So like the person that's saying no doesn't really know. And then the person that's kind of has the decision-making authority is pointing to a person because their whole model is like, well, I can do it if the auditor says yes. Okay. And the auditor says, I don't know. They're like, well, that's a no. We're just going to assume no. They take this conservative sort of loop, which I think is going to be, anti-competitive for a lot of teams that don't figure out how to get into some kind of way of at least testing this.
What's your hypothesis on what's going to like, what's going to cause that shift to happen more aggressively? Do you think it's like do you think it's just a disruptor coming in, or do you think it's somebody shaking them and being like how do you see that? How do you see that playing out? And maybe talk to me through like the ones that are like maybe the already technology forward companies, but then maybe the ones that are a little more inundated and more old school.
Yeah. So on the tech forward companies, I think the engineers themselves, it's a very grassroots thing where they're obviously on technical forums. They're seeing this.
Yeah.
They want to be part of this. So they're the same people that have, opted into computer science or opted into software and ton of high tech jobs early in their career. So they just have a natural sense of trying new things. And so it'll be a very grassroots thing. It'll come up, they will push for it. It'll happen faster. So that's the kind of traditional software companies in the Valley, kind of tech forward companies around the world, startups, et cetera. I think on the other side where you have the legacy stuff, there's going to be two things. Like one, they're going to see their competitors do it, right? They're going to say, hey, I'm hospital A and hospital B or this adjacent company launched it. And they're like, okay, we got to go after it. Like we were talking to an insurance company and they have Salesforce, huge Salesforce users. So they have like all their, claims data, customer data, all in Salesforce. And, Salesforce has a bunch of new AI stuff, right? Agent, Force and all these cool things. And we're like, hey, did you guys, turn that on? Or what do you think? And they're like, no, we can't. We're not turning it on. And you're like, wow. So like your most important critical data, you're sort of preventing from being like even experimenting or sort of seeing what's possible. And you can just imagine, like you could see it in the person that we were talking to's eyes. They were like, yeah, we know that we're going to be, somebody else is going to turn that on in Salesforce. Salesforce has lots of insurance customers. And they're going to become more efficient. And it may not be like, hey, they're going to be so efficient that they're going to fire half the team. A lot of these companies are growing fast. And so part of the challenge is like, if you can just slow down your hiring, your margins will drastically increase, right? If you're growing 20, 30% a year, which means you're hiring 20, 30% new people every year, and now you start hiring none or 5%, and the business top line still grows 20, 30%, it's going to make a big difference. And so, it's going to show up in numbers, right? So the people that sort of take advantage of this and start to see those efficiencies, it's going to show up in their public earnings, right? And people are going to be like, wow, their margins are increasing, they're growing. It seems like it's working. And any smart CEO, CFO that's going to be like, yeah, we leveraging AI, we're more efficient. And, that's a buzzword. You already see it in all the transcripts of these calls already of what they're doing, the ones that are doing it. You're going to see margin expansion while they grow. And then I think in the ones that aren't, they're either going to have to see that and get scared to doing it, or they're going to lose, market share. They're going to lose sort of their competitive advantage. And the moats that they think they have are going to have different ways of being intercepted, right? It could be that the sales process breaks down where the traditional way that they would go after it. It's going to be a lot easier for other companies to launch tools that's like, hey, here's an AI analyzer to analyze your, again, I'm using insurance as an example, but we could do the same thing with healthcare, with insurance, with, health costs, and say, hey, what should this pill cost? What should this procedure cost? What's the right way to code this billing? Like all these people that are sitting at home coding like manual billing and insurance stuff, you're like, man, AI would get you a lot closer, a lot faster. And then you're only working on the really tricky ones and the rote ones where you're like, click, click, click 3 times. Today they're spending all their time on the rote stuff and not on the really advanced, really cases where they need their human creativity.
Yeah. And it's, just like you said, it's such a hot topic right now. And it's funny for my partner and I, we're value, deep value investors, and, your knowledge, your experience, and your passion for this space is clear, obviously, with what you've done, the education and so on and so forth. I guess take me on both sides of this. What do you maybe think is overblown as it pertains to AI, and then what do you maybe think on the other side, if any? I hesitate to even ask a question. Do you think people are not paying enough attention to, specifically the investment community right now? It feels like there's more attention than has ever have been there. But I'm curious, as somebody entrenched in it, maybe on both sides. Yeah, what do you think seems overblown, and what do you think there actually isn't? What elements are not being paid enough attention to?
Yeah, I think the overblown part is the hey, AI is going to replace all the humans. AI is going to remove all labor. So I think there's a lot of, it's hard to do that, right? And there's a lot of things that humans are good at where AI is not good enough. And so I think the binary, humans will disappear from this role or humans will be unnecessary, I think that's going to take a lot longer to go to zero. I think what we're going to see is efficiencies. And again, whether it's growth or whether roles are shifting, where it's maybe you have a call center where today you have, for every 10 agents, you have 2 or 3 QA people and a manager. Well, maybe the QA people and the manager, because they're sort of spot checking at best today, now you can put in AI where it'll analyze all the transcripts of every single call and give you really, really accurate data and really, really accurate, unbiased scorecard, that those QA roles go away. And then what happens is you find out that the QA people were actually the best agents. And you're like, wait a minute, let's put those QA agents back on the phones or back on the line taking calls, and then remove the 10 or 20% of our worst agents now that we have a really unbiased tool, right? Because what happens in traditional call centers is you take the best people, they get promoted to management or QA. Now they're not taking calls. And so the actual average quality of your calls actually goes down. So I think hey, will it delete all the people? Not in the first move. I think you're going to start to see, edges of it and shifts in terms of where the best people are, but it's going to overall raise the bar. And so I think that's probably the biggest thing where people are they see AI, they're coming for our jobs, we're going to delete all coders. I don't think so. There's still, a hiring, challenge, right? To hire really, really good programmers is hard.
Yeah.
So that it's going to find the mediocre programmers can now be elite or better programmers if they learn to embrace AI, and there'll start to be a shift, right? And the ones that don't embrace AI are going to be less productive and less elite when they could be. So I think that's the kind of unprecedented thing where I think a lot of these people are well, it's just going to delete the people. And I just don't think that's going to happen as fast as, some of the, sort of news, outlets will, make you believe.
Yep. And okay, what about the on the flip side, what is there anything any element of it that people aren't kind of looking close enough into?
Yeah. And I think the main thing there is that again, it goes back to this like fear of the unknown and fear of trying it. And I think not using AI is sort of like saying, again, if you think back 20 years ago, nobody used the internet. 15 years ago, nobody used their cell phone. 10 years ago, nobody used social media. So all these were technology changes. And you could argue that people were scared of the internet when it first came out.
Yeah.
People were scared, of using, mobile phones, right? Or cell phones, right? They were scared of using of social media, right? They're like, oh, I can't have my employees, or I can't be like talking about my company on social media. And those shifts and those transitions into business happened slower than we're going to see AI come out, right? Because there's a bunch of reasons, right? There's still companies today that don't use the internet. There's still companies today that, don't use, mobile phones, or they still have a landline that they kind of answer old school style, and they're, chained to a desk, which is insane. And then there's still people that, are not on social media, even though their business and their customers all are. And so I think the difference with AI is that it can become the smartest, or sort of a really great player with any aptitude. If I'm technical, it can handle my business side. If I'm business savvy, it can handle my technical side. It can really fill those gaps. And the ability for you to just ask it questions and give you that information, the ability for you to give it very rich, detailed information. There's so many ways to interact with it, that all of those, though, it's just a better way of like learning or just getting information. And then you can still make a decision. And I think what a lot of people are missing, where they're saying, hey, AI is not coming, we're afraid, we're blocking it, we're stopping it. And you've seen all these different ways that companies are like preventing you from using it, or, we're blocking it inside our company. I get it. They don't want data leaking, but there's ways to bring AI in your company without sending the data outside the firewall, without leaking it outside your enterprise. And my sense is that piece people are underestimating. Like, it's just a tool, right? And it's a very smart tool. But you shouldn't be scared of it, just like you shouldn't have been scared of the internet in '99. You shouldn't have been scared of social media 10 years ago. There's a way to use it for good, and there's a ways to use it for bad. It's just a tool. It's a very powerful tool. But I think it's so powerful and it's so dynamic that people have kind of, in many cases, especially in regulated businesses, have marked it as like, man, we've just got to stay away from it, and we're going to wait. And I think waiting here is going to be a lot more painful than saying, hey, we're an insurance company 20 years ago, and we're just not ready to do claims online, right? We're not ready to do the internet. We're going to do fax. We're going to stay on the fax machine another 4 years. Yeah, it probably hurt them a little bit. I think staying on, your current model and not adopting AI for 4 years is going to hurt you a lot more in this cycle.
How would you measure from a data standpoint, from a KPI standpoint, the maybe speed in which companies are adopting this in a proactive manner, and which ones are far behind? Like obviously I'm thinking, companies that keep growing but are keeping their headcount stable, or even reducing it, doing same output if not more output with less engineers. Like those are things, right, that probably most people will look at that in the financials, the news will talk about. But like, what are the things that most people will miss, that somebody, like yourself, what would you look at? What elements would you look even deeper into?
Yeah, I mean, I'd look at their vendor spend on AI, right? Well, how much? What's their bill? Just like what we used to look at when I was at VMware. It's like, what was your cloud bill versus your power bill? We would negotiate deals on your power bill. We'd walk in and say, what's your electricity bill at the data center? And then if that is huge, and we're like, well, we're just going to sell you VMware software that's going to bring your power bill down. We'll literally, the entire cost of the VMware virtualization software, because it's just going to reduce the number of machines you're running. It will, unutilization, it will just bring your power bill down. So I think the corollary in AI is like, what's your spending, right? What are you spending on cloud AI? What are you spending on tokens? In the old days, it's like, oh, you have a zero spend of power because you're 100% you're on AWS, or you're on, some cloud thing. I think the AI equivalent to that is like, what is your spend on AI? How many tokens, how much AI are you using? How many vendors have you onboarded? I think that's going to be a pretty easy thing. I would go run the like who runs where type of query and be like, for all these new AI companies that are coming out, what are their big marquee Fortune 500 logos that they're claiming like, hey, this company is using my stuff. That's going to be the early indicator that if they've allowed that to sort of permeate their company, there's a good chance that they've at least taken a mindset that they're trying. And that is going to be the difference, I think, between companies that try early and sort of figure out what works for them, We were talking to a potential customer yesterday, and they were like, well, how do you protect AI? Like, well, if you're an AI company, we're building AI tools. They're like, well, how do you not build it for us and then not use that for our competitor? Like, go sell that to our competitor and make them equally efficient. And I think the piece that a lot of companies miss is that the LLM, the raw like infrastructure of this is very, very transmutable. Everybody can use it. There's no secret sauce in using like, is it OpenAI versus Gemini versus Llama or whatever? It's all in the training. It's your data and then the fine training of that. Like nobody is going to take, just like a call center rep at Verizon, the knowledge base for that call center rep that takes calls at Verizon, if I literally gave that to the person at AT&T, there's nothing they could do with it, right? The internal systems are different, the billing's different. It's literally kind of useless. Like you could literally publish it on the internet and say, hey, here's the call script for Verizon. Yeah, people may make fun of some of the questions or something, but like the actual usefulness to an AT&T call center employees is basically zero. And I think it's very similar with AI, where the workflow, your workflows, your business logic, your training, that's the moat. It's your data and the fine training around that's the moat. And I think a lot of big companies, miss that they're like, no, I'm giving my data. It's like, no, like, yes, keep your data private, but it's really that training set, your workflows and how you approach the problem that is going to be unique to you, that it's going to be almost useless to the other companies because it's so unless your process and your business is identical to theirs, it's just not going to be the same, right? What fields you use. I mean, like we always joke, like you buy Salesforce, what do you first thing you do? Go hire a huge consultant to go write a tons of custom software, and you end up using a very small percentage of sales out of the box. And then all of the stuff is some custom screens, custom setup. Like most Salesforce instances, if you went and said, hey guys, we're going to switch, it'd be useless, right? Because it's just so configured and so custom. AI is the same way. And I think people get a little nervous that they think that, an AI vendor is going to sort of move that across companies or even industries. And I just don't think that is a warranted fear in the near term. Now, if you're a media company and you're like, hey, I'm, the New York Times and all my articles are showing up in Perplexity or something and I'm not getting paid. Yeah, I think that's a reasonable thing. You're like, people aren't even coming to your website because it's been downloaded and replicated. I think that's real. Their IP is their content there.
Right.
But I think for most enterprises and for most, the data is like very private. You're not going to like have all that data loaded in the same way that like a media company would.
Yeah, I also think of I think you mentioned this when we talked before. Like even just tracking, like there's the bill, but there's also like usage, right? Like OpenAI usage. Something as simple, right? As simple as that, because that's like the early, like where my brain goes is, I'm trying to look at businesses and industries and try and see like what are the things that are happening today that help us predict more accurately where this is gonna be in in a quarter, in 2 quarters, in 3 quarters, and where my brain goes is as an operator, like. There may have been times in my business and in our industry where a lot of people would have viewed the business as like kicking ass and doing really well because they're looking at KPIs 1 through 5. And if you asked me on the inside, I'd been like, yo, 6 months, this is gonna be blowing up because of these other things that they're not looking at. And that's where my mind is going, and kind of that questioning was like, okay, I feel like this is going to be one of the things where people are all looking at these data points, which are really trailing data points. They're history. They're things that already happened, not the ones that are more forward looking. And by the time that comes to fruition, it's not necessarily going to be too late, but there's going to be a lot of catch up that's going to need to actually get done. So it's really interesting. It's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out.
I mean, you look at like how many NVIDIA chips are people buying, right? You're like, who's the biggest customers of NVIDIA?
Yeah.
Well, a pretty good indicator of like who's training big models, who's going to have some, pretty interesting outcomes, because you have to assume that they're spending that CapEx to buy those chips to go do training on models. That again, it's going to increase the efficiency of their business. They're going to produce something that's unique and differentiated. And I think it's, if you come down a layer and say, hey, who's just leveraging lots and lots of tokens, who's spending lots at OpenAI, who's spending lots with Google and Gemini, you're going to start to see them, probably separate from those who are like, hey, we just disabled that feature.
Yeah.
Like, we're not turning it on yet. And you're like, that's going to be a problem.
So what, more specifically, I know you mentioned it, but what are the industries that you think will like will see the most benefit from a lower cost structure with proper usage of AI? What are the first maybe 3, 5 that come to your mind?
Yeah. I mean, anywhere where there's lots of information workers, right?
Info
So
workers, yeah.
you look at like a BPO, right? Like the big
Hmm.
BPOs, you go to India, Pakistan, China, Philippines, et cetera, and you're saying, hey, you have huge outsourced. What's in there, right? It's, software engineers. It's, again, generally lower tier ones. So it's not your like,
Hmm.
Silicon Valley ones that are sitting there with creative and doing the product and design. It's like, hey, we're outsourcing big chunks of like rote contracts that are pretty, we send them a spec, they go build this custom contracts for software. Huge financial services, right? There's these huge call centers and towers of people, right, for these big fintech companies that are doing, hey, looking at Chase or Mastercard or Visa, claims, and just huge power, and they're like doing it from a computer with a very rote script. Call center is a classic one, but I think even outside of that, it's just where are people outsourcing lots of their work today, and they're giving them pretty directed, clear call. Hey, here's what I need you to do. Here's what success looks like, and it's easy to grade it, right? I think, one of our companies, we're doing a lot with voice AI, right? And taking a call and doing it with voice AI, pretty easy to say if you got it right, right? Did you pick up the call? Was the caller satisfied? Did they not call back? Right? Like pretty binary whether they got it right or wrong. Where I think other things where it's like, okay, you outsource, a mid-tier developer, you're like, oh, did they get it right or wrong? Were they as efficient? Like, could you actually fully AI that thing? Yeah, in some cases, but I think it's a little tougher to grade the outcome. I think, capturing fraud charges, right? Or reviewing manual things, right? That's a lot of what these financial folks are doing, right? Like preemptive wire checks, like going through like reconciliations and pretty detailed bookkeeping. I have a friend that's in like kind of CPA, sort of kind of outsourced, kind of fractional CFO, and it's like bookkeeping and transaction, sort of review, like very, very easy to go kind of build AI models around that, right? Now, strategy around raising money, secondaries, fundraising, probably going to be a little trickier. So I think as I look at the industries, it's like, who are industries, again, kind of using the same sort of vendor model of like, who spends a lot on AI as an early indicator? I think who spends a lot on BPOs, right? So what are the companies that are spending, you go to the biggest BPOs, overseas and say, well, who are their biggest customers? You have to imagine that if I'm a BPO today with a bunch of like relatively low cost and relatively low, sort of like low complexity jobs, where it's like, hey, if you're given a script, you're coming into the office 8 hours a day and you're grinding through a bunch of tasks in some CRM or some task queue, pretty good chance that those tasks are a low hanging fruit for even today's models, let alone as those improve over the next 6 to 12 months. And so I think that's where I look. Anybody with large labor spend. Now, labor spend that's in office and using a computer, right, is obviously going to be a lot easier than labor spend where it's like, hey, they're doing home services or nursing, right, where they're like, somebody's in my house, taking care of my elder parents or doing, that kind of stuff. Going to be a little trickier for AI. Local services, the guy that comes in and works on my HVAC or works on my air conditioner or fixes my microwave. Again, probably trickier for AI, but the back office of that, right? And so some of the areas we look at a lot is like, what are industries where there's, a really big back office compared to the front of office, right? For every doctor and nurse, many, many more times there's people sitting in the back doing claims processing, scheduling, patient checks, lab work, all kinds of stuff. So there's a ton of back office stuff that happens in healthcare. And happens in financial. Like for every teller, right? I show up to the teller. There's always way more people working not at the bank, and you're like, what are they doing there? I don't know. The line's really long, but like you can imagine, their jobs are probably going to be able to be done by AI. Oh, they're just there for like doing escalations. They're just there for checking something. They're reading through all the last checks, and it's all this checks and balances, right? Those kind of things. AI is going to be a lot quicker at it, a lot more efficient, and a lot less biased, right? It's just going to be like, hey, if it gets it wrong, you just put the fix in, and it'll always, get it right from then on, kind of thing. And so I think those are all opportunities to kind of see AI efficiencies.
Dude, it's really the 3 that come to my mind. Like, one, to your point, the industries that there's so much regulation around, and partially due to that regulation, they have insane cost structures, but also due to that regulation, the cost can continue to increase. So they have great margins as well. But I think of financial services, I think of healthcare, and it's still like to this day, like I don't get it. Like I'll go to the doctor's office, I'll go to some appointment, and I'm like, I still write things on paper. I'm like some of it's genuinely psychotic, and I can see at companies like that, the resistance is probably so high, right? Also, one of the first things you said is like the fear of the unknown. So it's almost like your fear of the unknown and you leaning more towards a resistant path. You have to toy that line of like, okay, yeah, there's some level of risk, but like, what is the level of risk that you just have to take, or else you have a bigger risk that you're saying yes to, right? And with these big industries, these massive companies, I don't. I don't know. I feel like they're gonna have a really, really tough time if they keep being as resistant, right? Like,
Yeah. And they just feel like in the past, they've always had really thick moats around their business for a bunch of reasons. And I think this time it's going to be different. And I think there's going to be new entrants that can grow really quickly and cover that, that will get the same regulation and go get, all the different certifications they need to become in business, and they will take customers directly. And I think there are going to be early adopters. There's going to be, entrants in these industries that say, hey, I'm going to try. I'm going to go say, hey, it doesn't make sense that I show up there and I'm like, hey, I need to give you this paper. And she's like, oh, cool. Can I just email it to you? No. Can you email it to my Yahoo address so she can print it and then scan it back into her computer, because their computer wasn't connected to the internet. And you're like, man, that seems like a really opportunity to like, have all of you and that everybody's that's touching this manually be replaced. And they don't have the power, right? The admin sitting at the front desk typically doesn't have the power to make that choice. And many times the doctor that runs the office doesn't have that choice because it's part of some consortium that, is doing the technology overlay, at some healthcare sort of like, and so it's going to have to change it there. So we're going to see those make changes. And some of the new entrants are going to just run right by them. And in other cases, we're going to see them adopt tools faster than their competitors and take market share.
are there any maybe what of these non-tech companies do you think are maybe doing a good job staying ahead of this?
Yeah, I think you're seeing like the ones that have the early advantage. I mean, you take Tesla, for example, like they're launching their own insurance, right? Like they have their own insurance thing. And you're like, well, they're kind of like, they run their same AI model that does self-driving. And now they're saying, hey, we'll just give you a discount, right? And so you can like, okay, well, why doesn't Allstate and Progressive? And they've had the like stick the dongle in your car thing. Hey, I'll give you customized insurance if you, track your, driving habits, and we'll give you. And so there's, you can take that as a small example. Now, can they extend that to say we don't have to stick the dongle in, we don't have to like give you a new thing? Is there a way that they can get that data, without having to go and, give you hardware and then make you sign up for a special plan? I think similarly, I mean, you look at like Stripe or something, right? That's just not fair, right? Because they're like completely built from the ground up, right?
Yeah.
Completely new, and they have like fintech stacks that sort of compete with all of the different traditional pieces of banking and financial system, which is why they're growing really fast. But it's also that like they're designed software first, right? So they don't have like, I don't think Stripe has a fax machine, right? Like they're, I mean,
Right.
if they do, I've never been able to fax them something. It's always email upload to the portal, right? And so like, they're almost systematically set up. And again, their entrance into this from a tech first point of view. And in the old days, it was like, oh, it was just a developer friendly way of getting APIs. They have this massive like step ahead in AI because they're already sort of plugged in. All their data is already in like a very accessible database that's in the cloud, that's modern, that, they have developers that know how it works. Where I'm sure if you go into a, bank like Wells Fargo or Chase and say, hey, can we just run a quick query and dump this into OpenAI? Like that would be a multi-week project to figure out how to get access, because there's, it's just not, it's a legacy system. And so I think companies that are doing this well are going to be, again, they've had some kind of tech moat. And I think, or they're going to be coming at it because they've acquired one, right? I think you've seen a lot of like these big companies acquire, somebody in their space where they're like, hey, they've, bought, a modern, healthcare company, or they've acquired one, or they've seen like some part of it. And now, what you're going to see is like, oh, they're just going to shift their business to that, right? Versus like running their old legacy stack. They're going to sort of essentially compete from the inside. And I think there's an opportunity there. I think like you look at some of these new kind of healthcare startups, like General Catalyst has done a bunch of them, right? Where they've kind of in-house, built these things, sold them, run them IPO, or had them acquired. You can imagine where those are landing are going to turn into platform plays that become the platform to like really take healthcare in a much more really, really fast way, where the legacy business that acquired them or the PE company that acquired them now can go acquire a bunch of inefficient businesses and bolt them on. I think that's another play that we're seeing is that private equity, the old way was like you would acquire a company and then you'd move all of the people offshore or as many as you could, right? And that was a great play for, 2 decades. And now the new kind of hammer in this space is like you acquire a company and you see how many of the workflows you can move to AI. Because the challenge is that if you go and tell a CEO or somebody, there's always going to be some concern that they're like, oh, they're thinking the old way. But if if you've acquired the company, whether it's private equity or you've taken the company private on your own through an acquisition, there's companies out there that are doing this. They're like, hey, we now own the thing. So there's no longer any resistance at the top to doing AI. And so I think you're going to start to see that as a move that, it frees the kind of current leadership team from having any reason to say, hey, no, that's not how things are done. Like my new overlord is now saying, no, AI is the first thing we do and not the maybe thing we do.
Yeah, it's okay. So I'm thinking if you were to step into any company, doesn't matter, like put aside the industry, what's maybe like the first most critical move you would ensure that company is doing to take the most pivotal steps to adoption and leveraging this in the best way possible?
Yeah, makes sense. So I think 2 things, right? So you have people that build shit and people that sell shit.
Yep.
Right? Everything else is in the way. And if you think of that,
I love that.
at every company, you're like, who's actually building the product and then who's actually selling it?
Yep.
All of those 2 are kind of sacred in the sense that like you kind of need those to keep the thing working. But all the things in the middle, all the things that are processing, overhead, corporate, this, like that is all sort of like on the table to sort of take a look at. And so I would start with those 2 and say, okay, sell stuff, build stuff, you're good. Everybody else in the middle. But it's like when you sell stuff, it's like you're talking to customers, you're taking the check. Not like, hey, you're helping the salesperson help the salesperson. We can't be a second layer. You've got to be on the, and then it's like we work backwards from that. And then the other way is you say, hey, inside of that, where's the labor cost? Like where are all the people? And say, oh, we have this huge department doing X. You're like, okay, well, how do we understand that? Or what is the workflow that's slowing down things that get built and things that get sold? Like, how do we make that as direct and as fast as possible? And whether that's using AI, and in many cases, it's just using straight technology to be like, wow, we need a better system. We shouldn't be routing this through so many funky reviews and so many different steps to get what we built out to our customer.
Yeah.
And so any industry that matters.
That feedback loop, I experienced this at my previous company. Like the further away the builders from the sellers or like the ground floor people were, the more reviews and hurdles and so on. And this person plans this and then present, like the worse the product got, the worse the service got. And it's almost like this, you put these layers that you think that's what you should do because things should go slower and more reviews. But like actually the opposite is kind of true, right? If you have intelligent enough people and you have good enough employees and so on, then they should be able to work through it on their own. So that seems so obvious, taking a step back and saying, what is everything getting in the way? And how do we make sure that we're leveraging the things that we are already at our fingertips well enough to streamline this and make this quicker ultimately at the end of the day? Because that speed of execution is, back to your initial philosophy, is critical, right?
In startups, you see this all the time, right? It's called founder-led sales, right?
Yeah. Founder
walks into a meeting and be like, hey, I'm going to sell you something. We're going to talk through this. A client or a prospect can say, hey, can you do this? The answer is always yes. And it's just a matter of when, right? Because they're like, I'm the founder. I can say yes to whatever if I want to get the deal and I want this to be successful. And then it's just a matter of like rescoping that and adjusting that to go talk to the builders. And so the founder sort of acts as that perfect pinnacle where there's literally the founder is the salesperson and the builder, right? They have both of those in a small company and they have the ability to sort of make that decision and kind of founder mode the thing and basically say, hey, we're just going to get that happen. And I met a company once, it was amazing. They were like, we say yes to everything. Everything's 2 weeks. And he's like, he's like, and whether we'll descope it, we'll figure out a way to do it. But in 2 weeks, we can literally deliver any feature. And it was just a magical way of thinking because you're like, okay, well, what is it? We have to go convince the client they need something a little less. We take a shortcut to get there. We make some changes. But in 2 weeks, a small company should be able to pivot quickly, go deliver that thing to close a client. And he says, yeah, we would just sit in meetings and everything we didn't have, we'd say, yeah, we can get that done in 2 weeks. And it was like a magical sales thing because they would constantly close deals. And it was like, yeah, we'd figure it out. And, sometimes it wasn't a great solution, but it got it done. And then we improved on it, right? And then they, over time, they got better and better. And they did have a lot of features.
I love that. That's hilarious. Maybe a different question on this same topic though. Are there any, maybe the answer is no, but are there any industries that people think like have this thesis of like, oh my God, AI is going to completely disrupt it, that you're actually less sure about? Maybe ones that are more, I don't know, they just won't be influenced by it as much?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, it's businesses where the human's still doing something with
Contractor
their hands.
work,
Anything with their labor, right? Whether it's giving the shot to the person, giving the right, like anything where it's like that's like, and I think the piece there is, that you have to back into is like, how do you make sure that individual is using their hands to do things that they uniquely only can do? So like, are they not spending their time writing after action reports? Are they not spending their time, entering a bunch of stuff into a CRM? Are they not spending their time doing inefficient routing to drive to houses in the wrong order, right? So there is things they can do, but I don't think like necessarily you'll remove that human, but you definitely can, again, that human's boat is building the shit, right? They're the ones delivering it. How do you take everything out of the way so that they can spend, 8 hours of their 9-hour day doing what they do and not wasting time doing anything else?
Yeah, because I'm thinking they like, there's the actual work that they do, but then there's like, they need to open up this form to enter in information, to submit that information. Then there's some internet issue, and then it gets lost, and they have to go back out. And that's probably the stuff where it's not the things that, to your point, are, I think that's a question to ask, is can they uniquely do that somebody else can't do?
Two examples. Guy came delivered an ottoman to our house.
Okay.
He spent more time taking pictures of it and on the entryway all the way in, taking pictures of the item in the truck, taking pictures of the item in the house, like making sure that he's not going to get in trouble. Mm-hmm. And whether that's a process that he was told to do or whatever, but he literally spent more time taking this thing that weighed 20, 30 pounds and carried it in like 10 seconds, taking pictures of it, and then filling out the paperwork and having us sign a checklist, and then going through his really crappy app on his phone to click through all the pictures and say that he actually took them. Another example, guy came to work on our microwave. 10 seconds, he finally shows up an hour late, finally gets in there and starts like, pulling apart, taking crash the board, gets a phone call, spends 20 minutes on a phone call, walking some other tech through a scheduling issue, and then another person calls, and like and you're just like, this guy's the phone tree for his company, in addition to being the work. And so you're like, these are two cases where like, you're not going to replace the truck driver that brings, the delivery person, right. But like, can AI fix the fact that like, this just seems messy? He takes one quick video and throws it up there, and it's not like 15 shots of all the different angles. Like, can the guy have an answering service that takes calls when he's like on the job, right? Like, yeah. So I think those are like very small, but like very like, native examples that I saw in the last couple months.
Yeah. Makes a ton of sense. Okay. Last few questions for you. What are you personally, obviously you are, you're doing all sorts of things right now, as I understand it. What are you personally most fired up about right now for this year, for the next few quarters?
Yeah, I think the increasing speed and just being able to ask better questions of AI. Because I mean, to me, like I constantly re-impress myself with when you ask a really, really good question of AI, you get a really good answer. And so it's not, the answers always get better if you ask a better question. And this is like classic, it's not the solution. It's like spending all the time writing the best question. This is the most true with AI. Wow. Because you ask like a really question like, hey, what's for dinner or something dumb? You're like, hey, I want to have dinner with my daughter. She's 15. We don't want to have anything spicy. We've tried these kind of foods before. Try something new that's different, and we're going to, and make it within 10 miles of our house. Like, holy shit, you get really good answers, right?
Yeah.
Where, and so like, again, you have to like be a little creative with that. But I think so asking just better questions on anything you do with AI, just spending, I think I see so many people that have like, the screen sharing or whatever, and they type something in AI and they ask a very mid sort of like short question. I'm like, no, go write 3 more sentences. Go about 3 times more than what you think. And to me, that is a huge shift in the outcome of what you're going to get, because you're just being more specific with what you want.
Which is actually, I think, makes people smarter too, because the better the questions you ask, the more to the core of the issue you're getting, and so on and so forth. Yeah. I like that. Okay. What project or projects do you want to share with people that you're focusing on, you're spending a lot of your energy on, that are either you're already moving on, or things that might be around the corner that you want to share?
Yeah, good question. So I think the main thing, honestly, I'm just started like doing a lot more content, right? So I think for me, nice. One of the things I realized at the end of last year was that like being able to connect with people has made a huge difference. And so I started a newsletter in January. I said, 0 subscribers, set it up there. It's called Founder Mode. And, today there's like 700-800 subscribers in like the first month and a half.
Wow.
And what's amazing about it, 50 different meetings. So tons of people that just reached out from my woodwork, from my network, like people that I worked with, and some that I hadn't, were like, hey, we'd just love to chat about this. And so for me, again, it was just a surprising sort of outcome of like saying, hey, I'm going to do a newsletter and connect with people. And that sort of like just posting a little bit more on LinkedIn and Twitter. And it's a little cringy. Like, I'll be honest, like when I first started doing it, like, it's kind of weird. Like, it just doesn't feel natural to be like writing all this. But it is, to me, like the treadmill of like the number of people that reach out every week saying, hey, I saw this thing that was cool. I have some thoughts, or like, hey, you want to chat about this other project? And so to me, that's just been a really cool way to sort of kind of re-network kind of in this post-COVID world where we don't see as many people in real life. We don't go to offices as much as we used to. And so then on the actual company side and some of the stuff, it's all still stealth. We're not like releasing anything, but I'll announce on the newsletter when we're ready. So I think that's probably the shill for the shill. Would be like just doing more content. But I think to me, it's like, it's surprising. And I've had a lot of people say, hey, is that working? And isn't it annoying to have to write a newsletter? And I'm like, I thought it would be. I definitely get lazy at the end of the week to go rip one out. But the amount of connections and sort of, revitalized sort of reconnects that I've made inside the network is like beyond my wildest dreams. I never would have imagined it.
Are you using AI to help you with the writing?
So with ideas. Got it. So basically, I basically had a blog that I used to have, and then I have my Twitter accounts. And then I basically, all week, I'm talking to chat, right? I'm asking questions. And I said, hey, what did I ask you this week that would be and I literally asked this question. I said, what did I ask this week that would be a really interesting topic for my newsletter? Come back with five ideas that people that know me and people that don't know me would be impressed to read about. And it comes back with like 4 or 5 things, and then I pick one, and then I sort of write off that. And I just do it all through dictation. And so basically I start up, I use Whisper, I just talk to it, and I just start talking, and then I send that to AI, and then I say, ask me 10 questions that my smartest friend would ask me if they read this. And then I talk back to those 10 questions, and then I say, okay, now format that in a newsletter format. And then now I'll go, that's my outline. And so the idea of like that sort of back and forth, because again, I struggle with just like starting on a blank piece of paper and writing. But if it already knows what I talked about all week, and it's random stuff, like what I had in my like smoothie shake of how I built my protein thing to like, I was, looking at these 2 travel apps and comparing them. It just comes up with, it's like, oh, you asked about this, and you asked about like QSBS, and then you asked about this other thing on, structuring C Corp versus LLCs, and it weaves it into a topic, and so it's kind of cool. So that's been it's been what I would call like my writing partner, versus like, hey, go write all the content, because I think the content, whenever you write AI content, it's just super verbose, and it's also like super repetitive. Like it kind of says the same shit over and over, it seems like, and it's like, it feels like it's using extra words. And then I use Hemingway app, which is like this insane, like, kind of editor. Okay. And I just drive it to try to get like below 7th grade reading level, and constantly keep rewriting and editing it until I get it down to like, it almost sounds like very, elementary, because it is, like my last newsletter I was like 5th grade reading level. 5 minutes of reading at the 5th grade level. And I'm like, that's pretty cool, right? It's like people are that attention deprived today. And so when you're on the internet scrolling, you're probably not reading at your education level. You're reading deeply below it, because you're kind of like, just cruising. And so if it's at 5th grade, you're like, oh, I can kind of capture that and grok that. And it seems to be, again, haven't had a ton of negative feedback. So, so far so good.
Yeah. I love that. I love that, man. Dude, this was awesome. This was awesome. I appreciate it. I learned a ton, and I love the perspective and the point of view that you have coming into these, coming into all elements of this topic. So I really really appreciate it. Is there, before we sign off, any other things you want to share with anybody that might be listening? Anything else that you're passionate about that you want to share with people, or any other sign off words from your standpoint?
No, I'm good. And I think, thank you so much for having me. I mean, this has been a great conversation. I think to me, like, these kind of conversations force me to also kind of rethink my thoughts. And so I think you've asked some really good questions, and I appreciate you taking the time to spend it with me today.
Awesome, man. Well, I appreciate you. Last thing, where can people find you? What's the best place to see what Kevin's up to?
Yeah, so Kevin Henrikson on Twitter, or Kevin Henrikson on LinkedIn, probably the easiest. And then I have a newsletter, Founder Mode. If you can just go to kevinhenrikson.com/founder mode, that'll work as well.
And you have 2 Twitter handles, as I learned today.
Yeah, Kevin Gods as well as my crypto one. If you
yes.
So like, I kind of keep them separate. So the crypto one is definitely more popular.
Yeah.
From a reach point of view, and people really love the crypto stuff. Is just a very different and engaging sort of audience for sure.
Yeah.
And it's funny, right? Because like, that one's only 2 years old and has probably 10 times the followers that my 10-year-old or 15-year-old account has. That has been, I've been using it in Web2 for 20 years.
That's it's so on brand with Web3. Awesome, man. Well, hey, really appreciate your time. I'm stoked to continue to watch your journey and continue to learn from you, and really appreciate it, man. Excited to talk again soon.
Likewise. Take care.
Cheers, man.